That's very good news. Item number 8 is a public hearing to consider a conditional use permit on property located at 11900 East Highway 350. I'll ask the clerk to perform the first reading at this time.
An ordinance granting a conditional use permit subject to certain conditions to operate an automobile sales business on property in the Highway Corridor Commercial District on property located at 11900 East Highway 350.
I'll open the public hearing at this time. Would anyone on the board like to share any ex parte communication they may have had on this matter at this time? Very good. Mr. Benson, would you like to introduce the application?
Yes. Rick Ellerman is the applicant in seeking the conditional use permit to operate an automotive sales business on this property. This property, to give a point of reference, previously was a business was operated known as KC Power Sports Auctions. That was operated by Mr. Ellerman as well. That has ceased operating in the fall of 2010. As part of this application, the applicant has submitted a site development plan, a copy of which you should have received in your packet. It shows a number of parking lot area improvements, primarily dealing with the additional or construction of additional islands in the parking lot. In addition to those improvements, there is also landscaping that will be installed. These improvements are cited as a condition of approval in the ordinance that's before you. The landscaping improvements are not necessarily shown on the site plan you have. They are actually referenced back to the site plan that was submitted and approved as part of the planned district rezoning for this property when that was approved to allow KC Power Sports Auction to locate on the property back in 2008. So the landscaping improvements have not yet been installed, but will be installed upon approval of this application. I'm going to stop at this point. The applicant has a representative here tonight, and I'll defer to her to provide more detail as far as the proposed auto sales business.
Okay, very good. Applicant is welcome to make a presentation. We will need your name and address too, please.
My name is Heather Wiesler. My address is 11900 East Highway 350, Raytown, Missouri 64138.
I have to ask you to, we need you to swear in, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you shall give to this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Okay. Heather Wiesler, 119.
You're good.
Sorry. Okay. Mr. Ellerman is not able to be here this evening, so I'm here to represent him. We opened this business, KC Power Sport Auction, back in 2008. He had a partner at the time. Once we learned more about the business, the way it was ran was not really the way we were told it was going to be run, and we ended up having to shut the business down because we couldn't make money. So the building has been sitting empty. We ran out of funds in order to be able to finish all of the improvements. The funds are now available to us. So what we're asking is for you to allow us to put a car lot on this property. We will agree to all of the conditions and try to make it a successful business. If we are unable to do this at this point, Mr. Ellerman has said he will probably have to let this building go back to the bank, possibly in foreclosure. It's just an expensive location for us to continue to, or for him to continue to own without being able to generate a positive income or revenue.
Questions of the applicant? But there has been a business operating in there.
We do operate Ellerman Snow Removal, which is a separate business we have, and that's where we're able to get funding. That business has been in business for 20 years. The auction portion of the business, all that type, the sales of vehicles, all of that has ceased. We do have offices there, though, that we were running Ellerman Snow Removal, which we do have a business license with the City of Raytown in order to work out of that building as offices.
I've seen a number of tractor trailer rigs parked in the parking lot there, and I see a number of, I think, old telephone trucks parked there. The
tractor trailers are people that live in the City of Raytown that have asked us if they can park there. overnight or for a short period of time in order for them to go home, shower, eat with their families, and come back and get the vehicles. There are two different people that have been parking there. One is Nightline Trucking, and the other one is a gentleman. I have his name, maybe Mr. McKay. I have his name written down at the office, and they've just asked us. Those are not for sale. I will have to check on the other three vehicles that were there, because to my knowledge, I don't know about them being for sale, so I'm not sure why those are sitting on that lot.
Okay. Mr. Ertz.
It's my understanding that you're willing to put the money, is it escrow, so that we know that all the conditions.
Yes, sir. We will put whatever money we need to do the improvements, which includes the curbing along 350 Highway, which was not originally in our plans in 2008. That's something that we've discussed since then. Where we will put all of that money in escrow, and we ask for you to give us until August 1st. If we don't have the improvements done by August 1st, we will allow the city of Raytown to take that escrow money and do the improvements on the property that need to be done.
I think that's great. That's what I want to hear. Thank you.
Further question, Mr. Hamilton.
At one time, previously, there were some concerns about fire alarms, smoke detectors, etc., inside the building.
Correct.
Has all of that been squared up with the fire department?
I believe that has all been squared up with the fire department. It was due to having auctions being held in the back part of the building. They wanted us to have a fire sprinkler system. Since we are no longer doing that portion, that type of business, they've said that we did not have to have the fire sprinkler, but we did have all of the horns, the lights, smoke detectors, and all of that installed that we were asked to have installed.
All right. Thank you.
Anything else? Hang on one second, Ms. Melson.
I do have a question, and it's on the site plan, and depends on how you hold it, I suppose, but it shows westbound, and then there's an interest, but there's a small area that says display area. And then there's handicap parking right to the right of that. Again, depending on how you're holding this. That display area, is that a display area for a vehicle?
Yes, what it is an existing area that is there. It's a little bit elevated, maybe 2 feet. It's just an area that we had asked to be able to display like a vehicle, an old-fashioned car, motorcycles, those type of items along 350 Highway prior to our sale for the week of the sale. That's why they had given us that as a display area.
And then I have a question for staff, that I thought there was a limitation on putting vehicles up on a display type ramp system.
There is, in the ordinance before you, there is a prohibition against installing a display area unless otherwise approved. Our understanding is that would not be not a structure that raises vehicles up, but rather a paved surface that's just elevated above the parking lot slightly, like 6 inches to a foot. It's not a structure like we've typically typically have prohibited on other auto sales. It's a different type of display area than that.
So it's not a big, huge rock and they're driving a Jeep on top of it or something?
I'll let the applicant confirm that for the record, but that's not our understanding is that it would not be that.
Okay, because I remember that had been discussed in other auto dealings before, so I wanted to make sure about that. All right, thank you.
I have a question, I think, and again, maybe it's staff and or Heather, but John, my recollection was that we were asking for any vehicles that were inoperable to be parked inside or off premises. And as I drive by there, I mean, it's that parking lot behind that fence is a mess. There's cars, there's boats, there's trailers that are inoperable. It's an eyesore for those entering Raytown on westbound 350.
I believe some of those items were left over from the last auction and just they haven't got rid of those yet. Now that the auction business is no longer operating there, and depending on the outcome of this application, if it's approved, that you're correct that the inoperable or unlicensed, well, I shouldn't say unlicensed, but inoperable vehicles would have to be stored out of sight, either in a building or off the property where they're not visible. Unlicensed vehicles, as part of auto sales, until they're sold, they are unlicensed technically, so they would be allowed if this conditional use permit's approved, but the inoperable vehicles you're correct, would not be. And this is something we'll work with the applicant to any remaining inoperable vehicles to get those relocated to
What happens to
bring the site into
the snow
compliance.
plows and the plows themselves off of the trucks? Are those going to be permitted to just sit there behind that wall again? They're an eyesore. They're not stored.
We can.
appealing
That's
manner.
a specific aspect that we have not discussed with the applicant, but I'm sure we can discuss that as far as identifying a more appropriate area to store there where they're not visible from the highway. Or
What do you think, Heather?
Well, we have another building that's located in Kansas City, Kansas, and during the summer, we usually move all of that equipment over to that location. So we can do that and move all of that back over to that location. We just have a lot of large properties that are
Sure.
in this area, and it's easy, or in the winter, for us to have our equipment right here. But we will remove all of that equipment and put it in our Kansas City, Kansas building as soon as the snow, usually around April 1st to 15th is when we try to do that, once we know that the snow season is going to be over completely.
I was kind of hoping to not have to tap Mr. Kapke tonight because we almost made it through the whole night without asking a question of our attorney. But if this board wants that to be a stipulation, do we have the opportunity to add that as a stipulation at this time?
It can either be added at this time. This is the
First reading,
It's
right?
my understanding, you could add it as second reading. But yes, it would be appropriate to raise it now.
Okay. I'd like to hear some comment from the other board members on that storage item, Mr. Hamilton.
I agree. I think we should add those stipulations for any kind of vehicle or equipment or whatever that is considered sort of an eyesore, that it ought to not be visible. And it would seem to me we could add that to the planning and zoning list of conditions that they stipulated originally.
You have a condition number 12, relates to the inoperable, dismantled, or damaged vehicles. Now, that would not cover operable snow plows and things like that.
But Heather, you've said you're willing to take those and put them somewhere else.
Yes, we can move those back down to our Kansas City, Kansas facility. If you would like us to, since we do have them parked on the westbound lane, maybe I could just have all of the guys move all of that equipment over to the other side of the building so that it's in between our building and Bordner's building. That way it's a little bit less of an eyesore as you're driving down 350 until we can get them all moved.
Oh, okay.
Some
So
of the
you're-
trailers and that stuff, they do belong, and we've contacted the consigners again today and asking them to come pick their stuff up because they're storing it for free. So we will be willing to move all of that until we can get it all moved off of the lot.
Okay, so you would agree to such a stipulation if this board asked that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, I would move that we make that stipulation and leave it up to the attorney for the appropriate wording.
You need a motion? You need a motion for that, George?
I would prefer a motion if you're going to
Okay.
amend the,
Stipulations?
yes.
Okay, so Mr. Hamilton's got a motion to add that stipulation, seconded by Mr. Azier. Let's handle that motion at this time. Discussion on that motion? Mr. Kramer?
Let's, just to
Mr.
clear that up a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
We're talking about the winter snow removal equipment. Basically, it should not be stored there other than in winter months, or did we talk that yet? I heard they're leaving in April, and I think that's fine. I believe they're running a snow removal business that they may want to bring those back next winter. Obviously, if they stored them in between the buildings, that may be fine. But I just think I need to clear that. I'm all for
I'm
this.
glad you did.
But I want to know what what we're doing here.
Well, I think what I had in mind,
Hold on one second. Mr. Cap, go ahead.
For direction, those of us who are going to be drawing this, are you just talking about the snow plows, or are you talking about any vehicles?
Clean it up.
yeah, I'm talking about any vehicles.
All right,
That was my
that are
intent.
visible from, basically visible from 350 highway or visible from,
Yeah, I don't know if you even call certain things vehicles, if it's a, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
if it's
you
a
know,
crate sitting out there and it's empty or it's got stuff in it, it needs to be out of there. The intent of that was to put that behind a screen wall so that we don't have to look at it, and it's out there and it's a
or
mess.
somebody's got a boat trailer or whatever. I mean, if they're selling automobiles, then automobiles ought to be there. Other than that, I don't see any reason to have a lot of other kind of stuff sitting around.
I think with that direction, we can draft an additional condition that we will probably put as 13, and it will be with the ordinance. It comes back to you.
Okay, Mr. Lightfoot? Hold on one second.
I know you talked about that normally the snow removal part of the business, you move the equipment around April 1st to your KCK location. So just for our drawing up this stipulation, when do you bring the equipment back out, just normally?
Usually mid-November. Mid-November is when we'll usually try to put it over there. Now, we have cleaned out the back of our building as well to try to put as many of those machines inside as we can when they're not being used. But typically, it would be about, I'd say, November 15th until about April 15th is when we would like to be able to have that equipment on the property to be able to run that business.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hamilton, do you have anything further on that, sir?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Mr. Kramer?
So it is your intention to continue to run the snow removal seasonally out of that building then?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, that business has been in business for over 20 years, and that it's a very well-ran business, a very profitable business. So we would like to continue to run it out of those offices.
So you're going to discontinue your Kansas location and move everything to this location? Is that your intent?
Well, no, our office is here, but no, we have to keep both locations because we have properties that are all over throughout the city. So we have to have salt depots and equipment at both. You know, this has helped us to be able to utilize the east and south zone a little bit better with having salt here, but we'll have to have that building. I mean, it's owned free and clear. We'll have to have that building for a long time to be able to also run out of that building.
So you actually store salt at this location, and you plan on storing the trucks inside the building during the summer months, is that correct?
We can move them back to our Kansas City, Kansas location
Okay.
after the season, and then we are asking for next November to be able to bring the plows and the trucks and stuff back here. Am I
Right.
understanding your question correctly?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you are. I just want to make sure, and I understand where the mayor was headed and the other board members. As I come in from my job in Lee Summit back into Raytown, that's the first thing I see whenever I come into Raytown is that side of the building, and aesthetically speaking, it's not pleasing to the eye, and we just want to make sure that you know, as people enter our community, they have a good impression.
I understand. And once we do put the landscaping in, that should, I mean, not that we, you know, but it should help to also screen some more of the items that are behind that fence. But we will, I mean, we'll be willing to move all that stuff on the other side so it's not visible and get the place cleaned up.
And for us, these people, the consigners that have the stuff that didn't make it through auction, what recourse do you have if they don't come pick it up? Can you just scrap that so that way we can get it out of there? Or?
I'll have to see what the laws are. You know, if we can consider it abandoned property and take title of it or something. I will work on that again tomorrow to get that stuff out of there. Would you like me to at least until, you know, I can get something written up from our attorney? I've asked him about this today because I said, you know, they're storing this stuff here for free, and they're not coming to pick it up. Would you like us to at least move it to the other side of the building until we can get them to pick it up? I've got to see what kind of a deadline I can put on these people.
Well,
to get it.
if we could have it where it's not visible, that would be a real help. do you think by the time you come back to us next time, you'll have an answer in regards to when these people are going to pick it up or whether you're going to be able to scrap it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I can make sure I do.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Asia, I think, was next.
Mr. Benson, when we authorized the conditional use permit for the auction, did that include the snow removal business at that time?
No, because it was just for the auction that the application came before you all. The snow removal basically is an office use. The equipment and the other items that we're talking about are accessory to that office use. Now, there's a certain point we cross a line where it becomes too much, and I think that's what the discussion has been about tonight. So, and we can, as we've talked about, we can deal with that through the condition of this ordinance.
I guess my question would be that if this is going to be an ongoing business, should they make a request for snow removal business on that property?
They, in effect, have it. That does not require board approval. They, in effect, have done that when they obtained their business license from the city because the zoning ordinance, the industrial zoning allows an office use on the property. And that was when in effect, you all or the board approved that when they adopted the zoning ordinance allowing office use in industrial districts.
I guess what's a little bit confusing is that when you adopt the office use as opposed to storing large quantities of equipment during the winter months. Does that make sense?
Right, and that's what I'm saying. At some point, it starts out as an accessory use, but an accessory use can grow to the point where it's no longer accessory and it becomes a predominant use and it needs to be scaled back or dealt with through zoning. And that's, I think, through the condition that you've given staff the direction to draft and incorporate into the ordinance that we'll bring back to you at your next meeting. We'll deal with that.
Okay. So you will then make that judgment when it's gone beyond the office use and bring that back to us then? I mean,
well, no, we're going to address that through a condition in this ordinance that's before you tonight. This is first reading, so the second reading, there will be a condition that you will be presented with that to adopt or consider for your adoption that will deal with that.
Okay. So then we will talk about that on a different occasion, specifically about the ongoing business that deals with that kind of equipment.
But the office use is allowed, and
right. I'm not
the aspect
that.
of the equipment and stuff that we're talking about tonight will come back. We will draft an amendment to the ordinance, and so for you to review and at your next meeting.
All right,
and
thank
you can deal with it at that time.
Ms. Melson.
You did state something about the salt. Now, is there a large quantity of salt that's kept at that building for
At the
snow
Raytown
removal?
location?
Right, for the power.
No, usually that, we keep it there and we only try to keep enough there so then once the season is over, we don't have a large amount. I mean, in our other location, we've got a building that is covered, that can store like 300 tons, so we send most of it down there.
Okay.
Because here it would sit outside, and
Okay.
it gets ruined if it sits outside over the summer. So what we try to do is fill that building up. Last time I ordered salt, I filled that building up as full as I could get it. We've got a little bit on this property that should, if we have one more storm, it should be getting out of there.
Okay, but then you are planning on getting rid of it when you're starting the automobile part of it? I mean,
Well, it's something that's kind of a seasonal.
Right,
It's
right.
seasonal. We would like to ideally be able to continue to have that, what we would call a salt depot on that lot, because we have a lot of properties that are in the
Right.
zone. It's just a lot more convenient. So we would like to be allowed to have salt there, throughout the winter months for that business.
Okay. And that may be something else that might need to be addressed as far as the salt.
I think a lot of the information that Ms. Miller has given the Board of Aldermen this evening is not information that staff was aware of until we sat here this evening.
Sure.
Based on that information, I think what we would propose is staff get in contact with Ms. Miller, actually do an inspection at the property, get all the information that she's talking about on the site plan so that everybody knows exactly what things will be there and where they'll be and when they're stored there.
Sure.
And I think that will help us work with city attorney to add those conditions to make sure the board's concerns are addressed. Ms. Miller and Mr. Ellerman have been very forthcoming, when we've been working with them. I don't think there'll be any problem with us doing an inspection on the property, so I would anticipate that we'd be able to provide a lot more information at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Mr. Van Buskirk.
Where's the salt stored?
It's in a, is it behind our detail shop? There's a removable blocks that we've set up to hold the salt.
Is it visible from the highway?
No, no, sir.
Okay. That doesn't concern me then. If, would you agree to the additional stipulations that we've discussed? Would that be anyway, be a problem?
I don't feel that they would be a problem. I will go over it with Mr. Ellerman, the owner of the business. He will be here at the next board meeting. As soon as I leave here, I will contact him and let him know what we've discussed. But I would not foresee that that would be a problem. If we were told we can't do snow removal out of that location at all, we might get a little upset with that. But if we are allowed to continue and put stipulations of when equipment can be there, when equipment cannot be there, where it has to be stored in order for it not to be an eyesore to the community, I don't foresee that he would have any problems with those stipulations.
As a matter of practicality, I think, you need to have the salt there, obviously, for the operation that you have. And I don't see that as a problem myself.
Back to Mr. Azier.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you come back at the next meeting, I'd like to know at least a clear definition of what you consider office headquarters as opposed to operating a snow removal business. Just a definition of what that means, or how you define that or how you determine that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up to public comment. While we've introduced this as a public hearing tonight, so I need to have public comment. So I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
And at this time, I would invite anyone in the audience that would like to address the board on this particular matter to come forward at this time. Welcome, Andy.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Board of Alder people. I think really we have two options here. Either property gets foreclosed or you approve it and they continue in business. I think it would be much better to continue in business, and I'd like to see a thriving automobile sales place there. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else in the audience that would like to talk to the board on this matter? Okay, we're going to close the public comment portion. Mr. Kapke?
Well, I wanted to point out, Mr. Mayor, I think we have a motion and a second to amend.
Oh, you're right. Excuse me. I apologize. Do I still get to count my public hearing as having been, my public comments as having been taken care of? All right, thank you. Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on that motion, which was offered by Mr. Hamilton, I recall? Or would you like to have the motion repeated? Mr. Van Buskirk?
Yes, I'd like to hear exactly what it is we're going to be voting on.
You're amending the ordinance, adding the conditions that were stipulated after they get together with staff also, as far as the equipment that's going to be stored. I don't think the exact wording was.
Yeah, we're going to need some, perhaps a little better wording on that for the.
I think that's what they're going to be bringing back to you.
I don't want to take a run at it tonight. I think the motion was to amend, my sense of the motion is to amend the conditions to include conditions on storage on site, take away unsightly materials, add that as a condition in section 2 of the proposed ordinance.
While we're still in discussion, would the entertainer of the motion and the second be interested in retracting motion and second and waiting for staff to bring it back to us so we have a little more clarity as to what that stipulation could be?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. As the originator of the motion, we can wait and see what language staff comes up with and go from there.
You're going to withdraw the motion. Who had the second? I'm sorry.
Did.
You withdraw the second? So you withdraw the second, Mr. Hamilton withdraws the motion, and we are back then. You'll bring it back to the next session. Okay, we have closed the public comment portion, and at this time I would entertain further discussion by staff. If there's further discussion, we're welcome to that. We could also, if you choose to,
I would make a motion to move this to a date certain of April 12th.
is that enough time, do you think, Ms. Lynn, for you to do your inspection and bring it back?
Yeah, that'll be plenty. The next meeting's not till April 12th, so that'll give us plenty of time to meet with the applicant and visit the site and draft.
So we are continuing the public hearing, at which time we would take the second reading with those stipulations coming back to us, and the date certain of that is April 12th because of the general election on April 5th. Good with that motion? Second, Mr. Pardue has that. Motion and a second to continue to date certain April 12th, at which time we'll hear the second reading. Discussion before we vote. Call that vote, please.
Alderman White?
Yes.
Alderman Pardue?
Yes.
Alderman Melson?
Yes.
Alderman Lightfoot?
Yes.
Alderman Azier?
Yes.
Alderman Van Buskert?
Yes.
Alderman Kramer?
Yes.
Alderman Ertz?
Yes.
Alderman Hamilton?
Very good. Item number 9 is a public hearing to consider text amendments to Chapter 26 of the City Code relating to the comprehensive zoning ordinance. And I'll ask the clerk to perform the first reading on this at this time.
An ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the City Code relating to the comprehensive zoning ordinance by amending Section 2-1, 4-2.01b, Section 6-2.01, Section 6-2.014F, Section 6-2.014G, Section 6-2.014I, Section 6-2.014J, Section 9-2.015, Section 20-2.0122H, Section 20-2.0133, Section 20-2.0133A, Section 20-2.0133H, Section 20-2.0133I, Section 20-2.0133J, thereof to alter the definition of and requirements for long-term care facilities in residential areas to comply with the requirements of state law.
Wow.
Could you repeat that?
No, we're not going to repeat it.
Please.
No. Okay, we're going to open the public hearing at this time. Would anyone on the board like to share any ex parte communication they may have had on this subject at this time? Not appearing? Okay. Mr. Benson or Ms. Lynn, would you like to present the application, please?
I will. In 2007, the Board of Aldermen approved amendment to the zoning ordinance incorporating regulations to govern the location of care facilities within residential areas of the city. The amendments included terminology used by the state of Missouri at that time in regulating the operations of the various types of care facilities in residential areas. Following that amendment, the state of Missouri in 2007 amended their regulations to include changes to the terminology that they use to define these types of facilities. The changes made by the state necessitate the proposed amendments that are before you tonight. The primary purpose in drafting these proposed text amendments is to bring the city code, or zoning ordinance in this case, into compliance and alignment with the state statutes. To assist in this purpose, staff has sought the review and comment from the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, which is the state agency that oversees the operation and regulates these types of facilities. The proposed amendment updates that are to the zoning ordinance mirror state statutes, especially with regard to the definition of the type of facilities, number, types of persons provided care for, as the state regulates those and uses those terminology. The most significant change of these amendments updates the term residential care facility to long-term care facility in the definition section, which is section 2. That is located on page 3 of the staff packet for this item. The state of Missouri uses the broader term long-term care facility to identify premises utilized by owners and operators for the 24-hour care of individuals. The definition also lists several levels of care licensed by the state that currently include residential care facility, assisted living facility, intermediate care facility, and skilled nursing facility. The definition applies only to those facilities that are licensed by the state of Missouri. If a facility does not meet the criteria to be licensed by the state as a long-term care facility, it is not considered a long-term care facility under our zoning ordinance as is proposed by this amendment. Secondly, the text amendment clarifies when a facility meets a criteria to be deemed a long-term care facility. Currently, if an owner or operator wishes to operate a long-term care facility in the low-density residential district or R1 district, they must obtain a conditional use permit. As part of the conditional use permit process, the applicant must respond to several standards within the conditional use permit section of the zoning ordinance. The proposed text amendment that's provided on page 4 of your staff packet clarifies the criteria to be deemed a long-term care facility to bring our zoning ordinance into compliance with state statute. The state does not require a license for long-term care facilities unless the owner or operator is caring for 3 or more unrelated persons. The proposed text amendment clarifies this also to be considered a long-term care facility with the maximum of no more than 16 persons, which is our current standard in our zoning ordinance. So it's 3 to 16 unrelated persons. The state of Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services also does not regulate the care of related persons, nor would the proposed amendment. So if someone's caring for parents or a relative, they would not be subject to these regulations. Third, the proposed text amendment clarifies what can be considered a single facility based on information provided by the Department of Health and Senior Services. They have indicated that there is a trend in long-term care facilities to replace older institutional nursing homes with a series of small homes within a small distance of each other to provide a more home-like atmosphere for the residents. They did indicate several requirements for a facility to be considered a single facility and licensed as such, including the properties must be contiguous and able to share resources. The properties must have the same owner and operator. The proposed amendment to the conditional use permit section on page 4 of your packet and page 5 as well of the packet have been updated to reflect this information as well. The same language was added to section 6 on page 8 of your packet to make the standards identical. Finally, the proposed text amendments on pages 6 through 11 of your packet include simple word changes in the following sections that update the term residential care facility to long-term care facility. And again, that's a terminology issue just to become consistent with the state. Those terminology amendments are shown in section 4, which is the R1 district, section 6, the R3 district, section 9, the NC or neighborhood commercial district, and section 20, the conditional use permit section. So at this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Questions of staff? Mr. Ertz.
This doesn't change the city's requirement of a certain amount of space in between residential care facilities?
No, it does not.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Melson.
Basically was mine. Basically what this offers is that it's aligning with the state statute, and just there's some simple word changes and definitions for the overall context of what this is brought forward.
It's more than just simple word changes, but generally, yes, it brings us into alignment with the state regulations, yes, in that regard. Beyond the simple word changes, there's an amendment dealing with the operational. If a property owner owns 2 properties that are contiguous, has the same operator, we needed to clarify that.
Oh, okay.
And so that it does that.
Okay.
We've also the number of persons at what the state does not consider a care facility that provides care for 1 or 2 unrelated persons.
Right.
They are not required to be licensed by the state.
Right.
And we're adding that into our regulations just to come into compliance or not conformity with the state. So we're not, because our regulations tie back to the state and require the applicant to obtain state approval in some regards. And so
Right.
if we're not consistent, we've learned from past experience with child care facilities,
Right.
it creates
Exactly.
confusion and some problems.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Ertz again.
Just a little more clarity on, my colleague Alderman Van Buskirk knows too. The same owner of two properties is still considered two properties?
Based on our information from the Department of Health and Senior Services, they can operate, we talked about standards that make it a single facility. So it can be two properties, and what that means, the things that they have to come into compliance with, if the properties are contiguous and able to share resources, and they have the same owner and operator, and the state of Missouri considers them one facility, they can actually be two properties or one property with two houses and still be considered one facility. So those two properties could technically be within 1,200 feet of each other, but they're considered one facility.
That would seem to go against what we are 1,200. So one owner could own 10 properties on a block, and therefore that'd be considered one facility.
Right, and I think when we sent our proposed text amendments to the Department of Health and Senior Services, they said that they are seeing a trend where people are doing just exactly that, that they're looking for a much more home-like environment to provide care for people in these types of instances, and are purchasing more than one home. And if they are contiguous and owned by the same owner-operator and share resources, then the state considers that one facility. So we felt like in order to be into compliance and in congruence with the state, we needed to propose that same exact language.
If we feel like we want to have multiple care facilities in the same neighborhood, we need to. Is that what you're saying?
The difficulty is whether or not, if we felt as staff, when we went and looked at the text amendment wholeheartedly for changing from residential care facility to long-term care facility, we worked very hard with that department to make sure that we are in line with their regulations and are not being more stringent. We wanted to bring the ordinance into compliance with them that made the administration of that program in compliance with the state. The current regulation, the current information in the zoning ordinance is not as clear, so what we tried to do is clarify that. Certainly the Board of Aldermen has an ability to modify that text amendment if so be it. When we met with the city attorney, I think he had concerns with being more stringent than the state.
I would like to know the concerns.
In regulating businesses or licensed entities, a local government entity cannot be more restrictive or more stringent than the state regulation. If the state acts in an area, the local government cannot exceed what the state has done. So that if an entity would qualify for a license under the state regulations, we can't put a restriction in our regulations that would prohibit that use. Now, having said that, we can't put a greater licensing or use restriction. We can possibly regulate the zoning of a particular use. In other words, we can't prohibit a facility from being licensed as a long-term care facility, but we may be able to regulate where a long-term care facility can locate within our city under our zoning code.
So it would be good for the Board of Aldermen to realize that approving a single household could be, in fact, approving a block. Assuming the properties turn congruently.
I think it's important to remember that in addition to these standards that we've talked about, these applications will come before the Planning Commission and then before you for review and an ultimate decision either to approve or deny. Any conditional use permit, you have factors that you review, the criteria. any application with respect to. If you feel an application, whether it's for one house, two homes that are contiguous, or 10 homes, as you mentioned, the example, is not in keeping with the residential character of the neighborhood, that can become grounds to deny the application, that it's too,
That's what I was
it's too broad.
Under
And
your zoning code.
through the conditional use permit. Now, you have to justify it, and you can't arbitrarily, obviously, just say, well, 10's too many, but 5's okay, or 5's okay for them, but not for the other one, but unless you have justification for those. So what may be in one location, I can't think of a specific example that this would be the case, but where 3 contiguous properties may be okay, in another part of Raytown it may not be because there's different factors, or the lot sizes are smaller, or the homes are, there's different land uses around it and things like that come into play. So
Okay. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Mr. Van Buster.
So if we did vote to approve a conditional use permit for a facility, and they wanted to add to that facility with other properties, would that come back before planning and zoning and back to us to add the other properties to the first one that we approved? I'm assuming it would.
it would, unless the additional properties were specifically spelled out in the original application and you all approved that, for them to phase it in at a later date. But otherwise, if you approved an application that was for a long-term care facility in one house on one property, and then later on they came back and said, well, now we're wanting to expand to the house next door. Yes, you're exactly right. That they would have to submit a new application, conditional use permit application, that would have to come back through and be approved.
Thank you.
Okay. We are still just in the questions of staff at this time. I'm going to, if you've got anything else, John, to add, or Beth?
Just one thing I forgot to mention, that the Planning Commission, as I noted, has considered this amendment, and by a vote of 9 in favor and 0 against, has recommended approval of the amendments as we've summarized tonight.
In this case, the city is the applicant, correct? All right, so I'm going to ask at this time if anyone in the audience would like to speak at this time regarding this particular matter.
One question
we have to swear you in, Andy.
First time I've ever done that.
Solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you shall give to this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you.
I do.
Thanks, Andy.
We didn't do this the last time. One question I have is the definition of contiguous that kind of comes to mind during this discussion. If a property is across the street, is that also contiguous?
Go ahead, Beth.
The information, the contiguous is actually the word that the Department of Health and Senior Services use. So we would certainly lean on the state. The state would make a determination on whether or not they believe that the property is contiguous, whether or not they believe they share resources, whether or not they have the same owner-operator, and they would make a determination that this is considered one facility, and then their license at the city would reflect that same definition.
Okay, thank you. My main point here is obviously you need to be in compliance with the state. I suggest this be approved, otherwise you're opening a can of worms. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else in the audience that would like to talk to the board on this particular matter? Okay, 1, 2, 3. We're going to move past public comment then. And at this time, we have several options. We can continue to discuss. We can ask questions of staff, or we can move to date certain, which is what Mr. Kramer is suggesting as April 12th. Is that correct? That's been seconded by Ms. White. So we have a motion before us to continue this public hearing to date certain of April the 12th. Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion on that motion. Call the vote, please.
Alderman Kramer?
Yes.
Alderman White?
Yes.
Alderman Hamilton?
Yes.
Alderman Van Buskirk?
Yes.
Alderman Pardue,
Yes.
Alderman Ertz,
Yes.
Alderman Azier,
Yes.
Alderman Melson, Alderman Lightfoot.
Yes.
Just short of adjournment, Mr. Azier, you had asked earlier in the meeting for a moment. It was regarding the silt collection at Wildwood Lake. Sir, did you want to add anything to that?
Only that I had visited with the head of Public Works, and we had discussed that we could at least, as a city, look into what strategies that the Wildwood Homeowners Association might look at to solve the problem. It's not like there's just one water inlet into the Wildwood Lake. There's actually 4 or 5, so they don't all just come under that street there at 67th. And one of the things that they were referring to was at one point, I think about 14 years ago, there was some work done in a neighborhood to channel more water down one of the other inlets, which that's what they were referring to, that they felt was causing part of the problem. And likewise, I had talked to the neighborhood and suggested that we get together, that the neighborhood or the homeowner association get together with the city and just have a discussion about what it would take to prevent this ongoing problem, and some possible avenues that they might choose to solve the problem, because obviously, first of all, it's not the city's job, but what we might do to assist them to solve it. I might add that Wildwood is kind of a landmark. It's been there for a long time. At one time, it was a amusement park. I don't remember how far back that goes. I think maybe to the 1920s. At that time, it was a major center in Kansas City for entertainment. A lot of the big bands, including Pat Boone, performed there. So it's not like just a neighborhood lake. So might add that. And I just wanted to share that with the rest of the board. Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr.
sir.
Mayor.
With that, unless there's any other discussion, I'm going to ask for adjournment.
So moved.
Mr. Kramer's got the motion to adjourn, second by Ms. White. Hopefully there's no discussion. Call the vote, please.
Alderman Kramer,
Yes.
Alderman White, Alderman Pardue,
Yes.
Alderman Azier, Alderman Hamilton, Alderman Melson, Alderman Ertz,
Yes.
Alderman Van Buskirk,
Yes.
Alderman Lightfoot,